Good afternoon, everyone. I am Michael Steelman, Director of Alumni Career Management and Professional Networks at William & Mary, and I'm delighted to welcome you to this afternoon's webinar, Mastering the Art of the Interview. Today's webinar is part of William & Mary's webinar series, and it's made possible by the support of the William & Mary Alumni Association. As we seek to provide relevant programming for our lifelong commitment to our alumni, we welcome any feedback and ideas to make this a valuable resource for you. Today's presentation is being recorded and I will notify registrants once the recording is available on our website. Just a few housekeeping items. It is important to note that if you are experiencing any audio or video difficulties, to please call the Adobe Connect technical support number at 1-800-422-3623. Questions are welcome, and our presenter will answer as many questions as time will allow. You can just submit your questions by typing in the box just below the PowerPoint presentation, and throughout the webinar, I will monitor the questions and share them with our presenter at the end of her presentation. Now, it's my great pleasure to introduce our presenter this afternoon. Rayleen Wagner is Vice President of Human Resources and Administration at Customer Value Partners, CVP. She has over 25 years of experience in technology firms as an HR executive, consulting delivery leader, and engineer. She focused on creating and optimizing HR organizations. She has led the HR components of several mergers and acquisitions, as well as international experience in Latin America, Europe, and Asia. Before joining CVP, Rayleen spent 7 years as the HR executive at Mantis, a software company, and over 12 years at SRA International as a consulting delivery leader. Rayleen is a proud William & Mary parent and alumna where she received her bachelor's in science in computer science. Rayleen is also a trustee on the William & Mary Foundation Board, board member of the William & Mary Career Center's Employer Advisory Board, and a board member of the Loudon Symphony. In addition to her incredible generosity as a William & Mary volunteer leader, Rayleen has been a tremendous advocate for our efforts to build alumni career management programs for all of you. And we are truly delighted to have her join us this afternoon to share her interview advice with the William & Mary tribe. Thank you so much, Rayleen.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us here today. First, I want to hear a little bit about you on the phone. So we have two polls. The first question is I want to understand whether or not you're an active job seeker. And by that, either you're unemployed looking for a job or employed looking for a different job. And then the second is, when did you last interview? And was it in the last year, 2 to 5 years ago, or greater than 5 years? So take a moment to do those polls. All right, so I think we have a good feel for at least about 2/3 of us on this call are active job seekers. So I hope this is information that can really help you. And then as far as interviews, there looks like 1/3 of you have had an interview for within the last year, but at least almost 1/3 of you, or 40% of you actually. But there's a good chunk of you it's been some time. So I hope that this presentation today helps you to better prepare for those interviews. And I certainly want to hear some of your questions in the end around what has maybe some of your lessons learned or things that you'd want to share. So let's go ahead and move on to the presentation. Getting the interview is huge. That's the holy grail of what you're trying to do in the job process. Candidates have shared with me often they need to apply or network for up to 50 opportunities in order to get 1 to 2 interviews. So that's they're a very precious thing to be able to get an interview and actually speak to a human. You got past whatever system there was or the HR screen, which is often, maybe only 5 minutes by phone. And so now your resume has gotten you the door. What is it that you need to do to both prepare and present the best you so that you can nail this job? So there are many different types of interviews. There are technical interviews, which might be about, if you're an accountant, it could be a test about accounting principles. If you're someone in the technology field, it could be some type of software program. There are case interviews. William & Mary and their Career Center prepare our students for ACE the Case, which would be seminars to help people do well in these case interviews, which are typically used in consulting organizations. There are behavioral interviews, and the whole idea behind a behavioral interview is these are questions that tend to start with, tell me about a time when, They're open-ended, and the interviewer is really hoping that the candidate can share stories with them. And those stories help the interviewer understand um, maybe their decision making, their frame of reference, the complexity of what they've done, teamwork, cultural fit. Behavioral interviewing is hard to prepare for other than through a mock scenario, but they're a very important part of interviewing. Probably one of my least favorite types of interviews are panel interviews, and some organizations do them quite a lot. This is, a typical interview is one interviewer and one candidate. A panel would be many interviewers to one candidate, and it's very intimidating. That being said, sometimes, depending upon the organization, they may line up all of their candidates into like an interview day, and rather than have, say, 3 interviewers and 3 different back-to-back interviews, it's more efficient for them to do a many-to-one approach. I've seen this a lot in nonprofits. In fact, even the symphony that I'm a board member and violinist in the Loudon Symphony. We right now are doing a conductor search, and we absolutely did panel interviews, and it was 5 interviewers to 1. And then what's becoming more and more popular there's always been phone, but video chat as the first round of interviews saves everyone a lot of time. There's no commuting. And the interviewer is on the video screen working with a Zoom. There's lots of different Skype. There are lots of different technologies for running that interview. But a new and emerging type of interview that is really putting people off their game is this one-way video. And what happens is the candidate is looking at their computer screen, and they're presented with questions, and the software is actually taping the response to those questions, but there's no human being on the other side. So that's a real tough one. So there's a lot of different interviews that you can encounter. So let's get into the preparation. I mean, this interview was a big deal that you actually have the interviews. So take the time to do your homework. Do not go in blind. Know something about this company. And I think anything, even if we look back at our time in William & Mary, knowledge absolutely builds confidence. And when we're approaching anything, whether it's a briefing that we would be giving within our work environment, but certainly for an interview. And so today there's tools like LinkedIn that can help us a lot. We can learn a lot about the job, the company, go to the company's website, find a few things that interest you, help you develop some questions. Don't be afraid to look up the interviewer, especially if you can find some commonality around perhaps you both went to the same university, or you have a similar hobby, or it's fine. In fact, a candidate mentioned to me once that they were terrified that they didn't realize that if they looked somebody up in LinkedIn, the person could see that they had looked them up, and would that be a problem for the interviewer? And actually, the interviewers like the candidates do their homework, so there's no problem with doing that. You shouldn't be shy about looking people up in LinkedIn. Know this company. What do they do? What are their products? What are their services? And who are their competitors? And recruiters, a good recruiter, should give you the names and the titles of the interviewers. If they don't, ask. It helps a lot for you to understand how long will you be there? Who are these people? What are the levels? Would they be your direct reporting manager? It really helps quite a bit. So in preparing for the interview, so you need to know a lot about the company, try to learn some things about the interviewers, but the job. Ultimately, companies are trying to match candidates to a job and get about an 85% match. So it's important for you to revisit that opening, that posting, that job, and take the required skills and put them into a compliance matrix, and be honest about your qualifications against each of those. You need to demonstrate that in the interview. And often what happens is especially if you're looking for a job, you've applied to a lot of jobs, right? So it's hard to remember what this particular job is. It's worth the prep to understand how you compare. And then, of course, the desired skills are important as well. When you speak in the interview, many interviewers are trained in a technique called STAR. And the ST stands for the situation or the task. The A is the action, what you, the candidate, did about the situation or task, and R is the result. So let's say you're an accountant. The situation or task is you're behind in the month-end close. What did you do about it? Well, say you were on AR, accounts receivable, and you jumped in and helped accounts payable to get on track. And what was the result? You met the timeline for the monthly close. Don't think in terms of stories that hit at star. It helps, and a good interviewer will ask you what is the result if you forget to mention what the result is, but often they might not. And I've seen humble people not really share results, and when I pull it out of them, I'm pleasantly surprised that it's pretty impressive, and they just didn't think to share. When you enter an interview, often you get the question, tell me about yourself. That's a typical icebreaker. Everyone who's interviewing for jobs should have an elevator pitch. What is an elevator pitch? It is a few sentences that you would share with someone in an elevator ride from the first floor to wherever your office is when they said, tell me about yourself, or what is it that you do? Your elevator pitch should give you a sense of, are you an accountant? Are you an HR professional? Are you a software engineer? What are you? And what are you looking for? The elevator pitch, if you are looking for a job, you should have an elevator pitch that you are comfortable with, that you can pull out in your network as you tell everyone that you're looking for a new opportunity. When they say, well, what do you do? My elevator pitch would be that I'm an HR executive specializing in technology companies, that I had spent the first half of my career doing software delivery, and I have found my true passion in human resources and like to marry the two. Quick. What did you get out of that? You got that I'm a human resources professional, but I really want to work for a technology company, and I operate at the executive level, and that's somewhat my preference. So elevator pitch is important. And when someone tells you, when asked you at the beginning of the interview, tell me about yourself, do not go through a 5-minute dissertation that starts with, I went to college and this is what I studied. So keep your response short, vivid, on point, positive, and certainly business related. Tell me about yourself is not a time to share how many children you have, whether or not you're married, all the personal information. The interviewers are told not to ask you those questions. You shouldn't be offering them as well. Likewise, it's not the time for you to share, I was out on medical leave 3 months last year. Don't offer that information. So, some sample interview questions. These are a few of my favorites. I've got gobs and gobs of them. Tell me about one of the toughest groups you've had to work with. What were the issues and what did you do to make the group more cohesive? Now, you notice this is a 3-part question, and it is really important when you go in an interview. You should have a pen and paper. It's often best to have it in a portfolio. You can have your resumes on the left side and you have a blank piece of paper on the right. Don't be afraid to ask at the beginning of the interview, do you mind if I ask, take notes? And when you get these multi-part questions, make some notes so you don't forget as you're just talking, because you're nervous, you don't forget a part. So in this particular example, I would write toughest groups, issues, and group more cohesive, because that last part is the part people tend to drop. So you usually can get people pretty riled up about toughest groups. I mean, you ask someone this question, they'll say, "Oh goodness gracious, the sales team, boy, they were so difficult," and go down a rabbit hole where they start to complain about them and never offer what did they do to make the group more cohesive. So multi-part are tricky. Write down some notes. Take some time to think about it before you answer. What is second one? What is your most difficult work-related skill you've had to learn? How did you learn the skill and how have you used it? Again, in this one, people tend to forget how do they learn it. And we probably care as much about how we learned it. I mean, do you tend to research things, or did you have to go and bug your coworkers? Did you go take a class? Really important. And it is important for you to have in your hip pocket, what is your most difficult work-related skill? And if it's If I'm interviewing a software engineer and they say presentation, giving presentations, that's a good one. I'm fine with that. I kind of expect it. If it's a manager person, and management, people management is really important, and the most difficult skill was learning how to manage people, doesn't come natural to you. I'm a little questioning. If you're an accountant or say you're a financial analyst, and you tell me the hardest skill you had to learn was Excel, I pause. So you want to have always in your hip pocket what's your most difficult work related skill. That's a common question. Other hip pocket question: useful criticism you've ever received. One, I've had candidates give me three. I don't need three. This is, give me one and tell me how you've grown from it. It's not good to say I've never gotten any criticism. I mean, everyone has. It shows a lot of times what you're looking for in an interview is how reflective is someone, how self-aware are they? One of my favorites are, how would your least favorite coworker describe you? And sometimes people say, well, I don't have a least favorite. And I said, the question is least favorite. They could still be a favorite. They're just the least of the favorites. And this is a very reflective question. I'm trying to understand, are you self-aware? Do you understand how you're perceived? And why? Biggest professional accomplishment, that should be something in your hip pocket. It troubles me when people go back to high school. They were an Eagle Scout. I had a candidate recently. They were a year out of college. They went back to middle school and the hockey team they made. And that wasn't a good answer. I mean, I would hope that you'd had more accomplishments since middle school and moved beyond the sports team, given that the job I had was not sports oriented. Tell me about a time you were dissatisfied with your job. What were the issues and how did you deal with the situation? Everyone has been dissatisfied with their job at some point in time. You've got to have a situation for this. How did you deal with it? It's okay to say that you left. It was, if this was not the right career opportunity for you. People have very reflective, constructive answers to this. And what has been the toughest decision you've had to make on the job, and why was it difficult? That helps me understand your sphere of influence, what you think is difficult. These are all good example questions for you to consider, and I've got many more. So you go into the interview. Presentation matters. All these little details can get you off on the wrong foot. Arrive early. If you're in a major metropolitan area like the Washington, D.C. area, traffic's awful. Understand where this building is. I've had candidates, and I think this is a good move if you're not sure, they've test drove it the day before during a similar time of day. But leave plenty of time. I had a candidate recently. I felt so sorry for the candidate. He was lost and he was late, and he came in, he apologized, and he owned up that, he got lost, which I appreciate that. But he was so frazzled when he parked. He left his portfolio in his car. He left a pen in his car. He didn't have, so when I came time for me to ask him, did he have any questions? He's looking around. He can't find his stuff. He doesn't have a pen. He had to ask me for a pen. And, the sweat's just dripping down his face. So it really can it sets the tone. And I just feel sorry for candidates. So don't set yourself up for success here. Always dress in formal business attire unless the recruiter tells you otherwise. Even if you hear from the recruiter it's a business casual environment, if you suspect you can come in business casual, ask that question. But generally speaking, people accept people to come in formal. And by formal business attire, men should be in suits with a tie. Women should be in something comparable, pantsuit, a nice business dress, skirt and top, whatever. It should be business attire. Your hands should be clean. Try to pop by the restroom before you go in. I mean, all this stuff might sound like common sense. You'd be stunned at how often there's these issues. Go by the restroom, wash your hands, dry them off so you're not like sweaty. Chip nail polish, it's like a little thing, but just be clean. Firm handshake, don't drag them down to the ground, but also make it sure it's firm. Eye contact is key, but don't drill your eyes into them to make them uncomfortable. But I've had many times hiring managers have come to me and said, I liked this candidate, but they would not make eye contact. It makes it look like you're hiding something or you're not confident. So be cognizant of eye contact. Resumes. So I know a lot of people know you've turned your resume in. They have your resume. Whether or not that interviewer has the resume when you show up, typically they don't, because someone emailed it to them. They forgot to print it off. They've just come from another meeting. They walk in. So do not assume they have their resume. I actually had a recruiter candidate once that met with our CEO and it was a recruiter of all things. She didn't bring her resume. The CEO couldn't get past it. How could you possibly not bring a resume? I mean, he was just, so you don't want to be in the middle of someone's like litmus test for what interviews. And one touch I saw recently, which was a really nice touch. I came in to interview a candidate, and not only did there was a table for two, and we were opposite one another. So she was sitting in the room waiting for me. And so at my place, she put her resume, and then I think we wanted a writing sample. And then she overlaid a writing sample with a little space between the piece of paper. It just was a nice touch. It looked like she was prepared. I've had people before, I've said, do you have a copy of your resume? They reach into their purse, they dig around, they come up with a crumbled piece of paper. It's just not worth it. I mean, this is, again, if sometimes you have to apply to 50 jobs to get 1 or 2 interviews, you don't want these little things to be a problem. Watch your posture. If a person comes in the room, stand up and shake their hand. I can't tell you the people who've leaned back in the chair and kind of offered a limp hand up. All those little things matter. So this all is into your first impression. And you want to make sure your impression is good with everyone you interact with at that company, especially the person who scheduled your interviewer, the recruiter, the receptionist. We ask the receptionist. I've had receptionists before come over and say, oh, that candidate was just fantastic. Don't you love that candidate? I mean, people can be friendly and really share a vibe, a high energy, good vibe. But if you're only interested in, I realize you're nervous, but don't overlook everyone that you meet. Wait patiently for the interviewers. Don't be standing up and talking on the phone. Don't be working off your email. Your phone, if it's with you, should be off, not even on vibrate. And it's best just to leave it in the car. It's a lot easier to not be tempted by it or distracted by vibrations. So on the other thing about presentations, what you bring with you, I've said your resumes, paper, pen. Ask them if it's okay to take notes. Capture those multi-part questions. And don't be afraid to ask for the question to be repeated. So I like to think of this as a spelling bee. Anyone who's ever watched the spelling bee, like the ESPN spelling bee, it's like my husband's favorite thing to do. And the students always say, can you repeat the question? It buys them time to think through what their answer is. May I have a moment? So don't be afraid to ask this. The worst thing to do is to jump in and ramble. I've seen candidates too frequently jump in, ramble, and pause and go, what was the question again? Or I missed a part. I don't remember what it was. So be comfortable with silence. Pause, take a breath before you start answering. Typically at the end of the interview, the interviewer says, do you have questions? Always have questions for every interviewer. And you can come up with just some stock questions, which are generic. I have a couple at the end of this slide. What do you like best about working here? If you could change one thing about the company, what would it be? Add to your questions things you've researched on the website. Something about, maybe a new contract win. You look at their press releases, a new executive, company challenges, whatever. I mean, you should have a list of questions. You should have enough for every interviewer. I don't care if you've had 4 interviews. The HR person, you could have HR kind of questions. Benefits, I wouldn't go there. I mean, at the minimum, describe the culture. Those are easy questions. If you don't have any questions, it actually looks like disinterest. So it's easy to just type up a bunch, pull some off your list, and then check them off as you ask those questions, and again, how you're taking notes. Always collect business cards. If they have them, ask them for business cards. Easier for you then to follow up. Ask about a time frame for making a decision. Do not ask every interviewer that. Ask the hiring manager or the HR person, but don't be afraid to ask someone for that time frame. One question that people ask me that I like it puts me in the hot seat. When the interview's done, the candidate says, okay, we've spent however much time together. Do you have any concerns about my ability to perform this job? And I have to say, as an interviewer and as a human being, I feel compelled to be honest. And so if I think they're weak in certain areas, I share that. And so at least you have a sense of how you did, because it's really hard to judge how you did. Sometimes people think, wow, we really hit it off. We got a personal connection. That may have been great, but that just means they might want to go out for a beer with you. It may not mean that they want to hire you for the role. This I cannot stress enough. Do not talk about salary. Do not offer it. If they ask you, of course, answer. The salary, you are not in the negotiating position until you have a firm offer in writing. And anything you can say about salary prior can jeopardize your movement to the next level. If you are out of work, your salary should be negotiable, and you should say negotiable if you can. A lot of times the online applications don't allow that. So it's tricky if you usually do have to share what you made last. But I have seen some just extraordinary failures of people, making demands because they think the interview went well. I had one candidate who had a set of interviews and followed up with an email, being very clear that they would accept no less than this number. They needed like these 5 benefits. We were stunned. And we thought the person could have been in the short list. Once we saw that and how demanding they were off the table. So this is just not a point of negotiation. I had a candidate recently who did well, read it well. We were ready to make an offer. And the candidate said, I'd like to have one last meeting with the hiring manager. Again, not your time to ask detailed questions of the hiring manager until you have an offer. So the candidate talked to the hiring manager. The candidate had all kinds of questions about could they work from home? How many days a week could they work from home? And the candidate said, actually, I know you need this filled this month. I won't be able to give notice until mid-January, which would have delayed our filling the position by 1.5 months to 2 months. This candidate actually talked themselves out of the job. Because the timing didn't work, and because we felt like, to be honest, they were a little high maintenance about the work from home thing when it was an in-office team. We were a really flexible work environment, but that's not the time to ask for it. So we moved on, and we hired another candidate. Well, that first candidate came back and said, like a month later, do you have any update? I heard you hired somebody else. And what they had done is once you have a written offer, you can ask all the questions in the world, and they have to honor that written offer. Now you're in the hot seat, and now you can make the decision. But be careful what you ask prior to that written offer. You want to show your passion for that job and that company. You want them to be excited and engaged, that you're not just doing them a favor if they were lucky enough to hire you. So here's some do's and don'ts. Get a good night's sleep. I mean, these are kind of the basics. Have, full stomach, good night's sleep. Listen very carefully. And certainly answer the question that's asked. Don't answer a bunch of other questions. Back to my, what's the most useful criticism you ever received? Don't list 3. Be brief. And that's something where practice really does matter. Mock interviews work. Even if you're doing a mock interview with your spouse, your roommate, your friend, it helps to just talk through your stories, be comfortable, being brief. I think that's the problem where I've coached people before on interviewing, and I run a group where we help folks that are unemployed, and some of the volunteers and I before have said, stop right where you just finished. You answered the question, but you went on for like 4 minutes. Like, stop. Usually you answer it in the first minute or so. Be aware of body language. Don't be slouching back. Don't have your arms crossed. Always be positive. Don't fall in the trap. So the behavioral questions can dig up some emotion of some negative situations. Do not fall in the trap where you take that hook, become emotional, and start complaining. I've had some interviews where at the end of the interview, the person looks at me and goes, "Why was this interview so negative?" My questions aren't meant to be negative. They're very open-ended, but boy, a lot of negativity came out of the person. And it could be that they're in the middle of a very difficult situation, but it scares employers off. Don't lie or exaggerate. It's gonna come back to bite you. Don't dominate the interviewer. Let the interviewer drive the pace. This is their time. After you have an offer, you can ask all the questions you want. A couple of these I've done. Don't be critical of your former employer or supervisor. And silence. Silence is a good thing. Be careful, be comfortable with it. It doesn't have to be super long, but be comfortable. After the interview, take the time to send a thank you note. We receive thank you notes from probably 5% of the candidates. It's stunning because it's really easy to do with an email. Have a little draft that you keep of what your standard thank you note is, and then customize it for each person and the company. It doesn't have to be long. It could be like 4 lines, but at least add one sentence that mentions something you discussed. So you don't send the same email to everybody. So if you had 3 interviewers, 3 little tips. That's what helps with your notes as well. Show your enthusiasm for this company and this job. So it is rare, but boy, does it make an impression. A handwritten thank you note is really something else. And I had a college candidate once, and we recruit heavily in our firm at colleges, and we have college interview days, and we'll have 10 students at a time. And this candidate interviewed, did fine, was kind of middle of the pack, but the candidate went down to their car, took out thank you notes, wrote one to each interviewer, and brought them up and left them with the receptionist. So those interviewers had those handwritten thank you notes when they left that day. On like 8 o'clock at night on a Friday night, got emails from the interviewers. Oh my goodness. They took pictures of them with their phone. First time in my career I've had a handwritten thank you note. So if this is a really important job for you, it can really impress. I think what this candidate did by going down the car and coming back up was smart, because mail these days, snail mail, is like a little unpredictable, and who knows where it goes in the mail system. So I like this approach. You could do both as well. So video interviews. I'd like now to do a poll, and there's 2 different questions, which is, have you had a video interview with a person on the other end of the screen? And the other question is, have you had a video interview with no person on the other end of the screen? Let's take a few minutes. Okay, so what I see from the polling is the majority of you have had a little over, well, probably 50-50. Half of you have had video interviews. And no one has had the one-way. Well, gosh, look out, because the one-way is becoming all the rage with every month. Our recruiter here has a friend who is re-entering the workforce. She's had 5 or 6 of these one-way video interviews. I have a daughter who's a senior at Virginia Tech. She has had 5 since September of these one-way video interviews. So with video interviews, what do you need to watch for? Your background. You want to sit someplace where there is a blank wall behind you. At the Cohen Career Center, they are actually coaching students to try to reserve one of the rooms in the Cohen Career Center so that it's just a beige wall behind you. I've seen flags. I've seen, all kinds of interesting things. My daughter at Virginia Tech is a fashion merchandising and design major. She had one job where they wanted her closet to be behind her. They told her what they wanted to be behind her. So it's that's number one, which is and number two, in any kind of video with or without a person on the other side, test it out. Test it out a good 15, 20 minutes before you get into that video. It's often you might have software difficulties, and then it's difficult and it sets the whole interview off. The one-way video. So the thing with the one-way video that you really need to watch out for is it's unnerving without a person. Everyone who does one of these things is very unsettled. And so typically what happens is the question pops up on the screen, and then you can hit start and you have a timed response. So the temptation is, oh, this is pretty cool. I see the question. I'm going to go pull up the job position, because the question may say, why do you want this job? Or what about this job position, makes you want the job? The problem with that is that you start to not do the prep that you would have done if you had an in-person interview. And what you definitely don't want to do is read something. And because they actually are trained when they evaluate these video interviews, or these one-way video, is if your eyes are moving back and forth, then you're reading the screen. So though it's a temptation, don't do it. So my biggest advice for you on interviewing is do mock interviews. Take advantage of people who are willing to walk through with you, because you can tell when we go to campus and there's strong career centers like William and Mary's, you can tell that the interviewers are well prepared. They hear the question, they pause, they reflect, spot on, they hit it. And it just sets a tone for the interview. And you will stand out by being well prepared. You'll be less nervous by being well prepared. So let's add on to this a little bit about the offer negotiation, because this is really important. And to be honest, more than interviewing, I've coached more people where this has created some difficulty. I think I said it earlier, don't negotiate a thing until you have a hard copy offer, or at least a written. These days, often they're emailed. Even if you have a verbal offer, verbal offers are not done until you have something in writing. The person who presented the verbal offer to you, they might not actually be have the authority to extend the offer. Maybe there's no budget for it. Who knows? But a verbal offer is not a firm offer. A lot of people like to negotiate and send an email over. They coordinate the wording they want to use. They take the email and, they might have their spouse help them or someone in HR. In any negotiation, voice to voice is always better, because you can hear the tone of the other person. You can get a sense on where there's wiggle room and where there's not. Other thing you really can do is you can build up your enthusiasm for the job. And by building your enthusiasm for the job, they want to make concessions for you. So typically, where I've seen it done best, where I'm just putty in this person's hands, is that the candidate emails me, thank you so much for the offer. Is there a good time where we can discuss? I just have a few questions. So, now I'm thinking it's done. We've picked this candidate. I want this person to accept the job more than anything. Person gets on the phone. They share their excitement for the role, for the company. They're specific why they think there's going to make so much of a difference. And meanwhile, I'm on the other end of the phone, and I'm, okay, please, they're going to accept. I'm so excited, because we don't want to go back and recruit for this role. We're done. Typically, we're pretty excited about our top candidate. And then I just have a few questions and list more than one thing. Like typically you want to ask for more money, but don't just ask for more money. And for everything that you ask, tie it to something. Okay, so these are a lot of typical asks. I want more money. Explain why. Because it's a larger role. There's commuting expenses. The offer is less than you made at your last job. Explain it. Just don't say I want more money. And beware of, oh, Glassdoor said Java developers make, because most companies of any size have some pretty sophisticated purchased compensation market data. So, that's usually not the right. You can try it, but usually you want to go about something that's very tangible, like real money to you. My W-2 last year was, this won't be. Ability to work from home, now's your time to say, hey, the commute's really a big deal for me. Would it be possible to work from home? This is always a good one to put in, that almost always they say yes, and then it's good for the multiple things you're asking. I have an upcoming vacation in 2 months. I just want to clear it, be okay now that, I have approval for that because it's important, and will I have accrued leave? Some people ask about whether or not a cell phone's covered. I mean, these days in most companies, cell phone expenses aren't covered. It's kind of an old thing, but that's one. Start date's another easy one to throw into the mix with more money. Perhaps you want to see if there's any opportunity to take off a week. You want to give 2 weeks notice to your current employer, like to take off a week before. Is there any negotiation on start date? And even if this isn't important to you, you can add it to the mix, and you can just ask, is there any negotiation on start date? And even though you don't really want to negotiate on that, a lot of times at this point in the time, you ask for more vacation or paid time off. Also, it's an opportunity to ask for a sign-on bonus. If you've got some repayments on the other side, like for tuition assistance or a reimbursement, or say you have a bonus, they want you to start in December, bonuses are paid in January. Last year you earned $5,000. It is well within your right to say, look, if I start in December, I'm going to be out that bonus. Would you consider a sign-on bonus? So this is, these slides are going to be sent out after, but this briefing is awesome. This professor from Harvard Business School, it's 30 minutes, but it's a very good briefing on how to negotiate a job offer. And I think it's a must watch if you think you're going to be negotiating one anytime soon. So I'll turn it over to you and questions. I hope this has been useful for you, and I'd love to ask any specific questions. And here is my contact information as well. If you've got a personal situation you'd like me to talk with you, I coach folks all the time, and I'm happy to connect with you and help you
Raelene,
further.
thank you so much on behalf of all of us watching this today and those watching the recording. Truly a great run through in 40 minutes of sort of the do's and don'ts of interviewing from an expert like you who interviews hundreds of people on a regular basis. And we really appreciate all that you do for William & Mary and the students as well as the alumni that you're helping every day. We do have a few questions, and as a reminder for those that have questions, just type them in the Q&A box just below the PowerPoint and I'll go through them. And we have about 15 minutes, so I'll do my best to ask as many questions that we have time to before the hour. So the first question, Raelene, is it ever appropriate as a candidate to ask for an opportunity to come back after an interview if the candidate has more questions, or is there an appropriate way to do this if you have specific questions?
Only after offer, and it's very appropriate after offer. But it takes a lot of time for the companies to meet, so it's fine to ask questions by phone of the recruiter, or but be careful that you don't ask so many questions that it makes it look like you are questioning whether this is the right opportunity for you.
Along those lines a little bit, what about follow-up to the interview process? Not the thank you. Is there any appropriate communications that you as the candidate initiate with the company?
That's a good question. In fact, I've had a lot of candidates ask me, I did my thank you note. I'm very interested. I don't want to be a stalker. What would be the right amount of time before I send a follow-up to say, do you have any update on the position? And usually, first of all, they gave you a time frame, hopefully, right? And if they said, we hope to make a decision by the end of the week, perhaps the following week, you send a note, and generally direct your communication to your point of contact, your recruiter. You can be the hiring manager, but you're more likely to get answers out of out of the recruiter. And then I've had the follow-up question, which is, okay, again, don't want to be a stalker. How often do I reply? And I will say, send another note. And, one or two notes just to reiterate your enthusiasm for the position and that it's one of your top choices. Oh, and there's one other thing that I didn't mention that's just hugely important. I should have added this to the slides. If you have, say you received an offer from another company, and that's company A, but you really would like company B, and you haven't heard from company B, send company B an email and say, I am super excited about your company and the role. I do have a current offer with a deadline of, and I very much would like to consider, company B as well. That gets people energized like you cannot imagine on the hiring side. So please share if you've got an offer. Don't make a decision on an offer without giving your other top companies in your mind an opportunity to weigh in.
Great. Thank you so much for answering both those questions. This next question I think is really important for a lot of people re-entering the workforce. So many people take time off to raise their family, and in this individual it's been out 5 years due to family caregiving, and wants to know the best way to explain this, especially if changing fields as well.
Yeah, so I would just be upfront with it. I would say that that you have been out of the workforce most recently to care for your family, period. You don't need to explain that they're children, that there's a dying parent, doesn't matter. These days, people are pretty comfortable with flexibility. What are the employer's concerns going to be if you're re-entering the workplace? They may be concerned that your skills are not current. So that's one thing to be aware of. I think changing careers always is difficult when you're currently not employed. So if I'm an HR person, say I'm an HR generalist, and I really want to get into accounting, that is typically an uphill battle because recruiters, the best way to make that, not the only, the best way to make that work is through networking. Because for applying for jobs, remember we're looking for an 85% match. That's just not going to happen in a career change. So networking is your best friend anyway when you're looking for a job. You should be networking heavily and have a real marketing plan on how you're doing so, but especially if you're going to do a career change and have been out of the workforce. And I personally think that people who are re-entering the workforce are just like, it's a gold mine out there, I believe, of overqualified people. And I know in our firm we hire quite a few, and I feel like in every case they've dazzled us beyond because it's just a whole untapped educated workforce.
There are a number of programs out there doing some work together on that specific audience of, I know the iRelaunch program and some others in specific industries.
Yeah, well, and the panelist, the company that at that breakfast of business cards that I did.
Oh, Jen's company.
And
Yes.
yeah, she has a company. Yeah, she has a company that does flexible work environments. So that would be, either from home or part-time. And that's a nice way to get back in. The other thing is sometimes it's good if you've been out of the workforce to just get something on your resume that looks like work experience, and not so much the volunteer stuff. I mean, that's fine. But say you were working 5 hours a week, doing bookkeeping. No, you don't need to say that it's part-time, and you don't need to say it's 5 hours a week. So you put in your resume, XYZ company, accounting associate, 2010 to present. Um, I think it's best if you're not trying to game it. So I think be honest about it. With interviewing is like dating and then all of a sudden getting married after just a couple dates. So it is
And if you're
important. It's a very
looking to help
superficial
you
process. I think it's important for the company to be honest about the
to narrow
downfalls of the
down your
role of the
strengths, I really
company,
recommend the
because they're
Strengths
usually trying to
Quest or
present the
Strengths
best light of the
Finder
company as well.
assessment tool. It's very
And I think for the
portable,
candidate as well,
easy to
be honest
do
about your
online,
strengths.
and
And
it
like,
kind of
if
helps
you
you
really don't
identify
like writing,
those
say you
strengths
really
and
don't like
weaknesses that
writing.
you're
If
referring
it's a
to as well.
job that requires a lot of writing, you're probably not going to do well in that job. So I think just be honest.
Absolutely. A little follow-up to our earlier question about re-entering. How do you answer salary questions related to that, especially if there's been a
Yeah, and
gap
the other thing about
between your
strengths
last earned
that I would add
salary
is
or
you
and the
should make
present
your strengths match that
earnings?
job description. So one of the required skills in there should be one of your strengths. I usually recommend people say negotiable or
And going
open,
back
or
to
I
some of
trust
the
that you
questions
are
that
going to pay
you
appropriately for the
uh,
role.
come
If they
prepared
make
with,
you put
are
in a
there
number
certain
for
questions that you've heard that
desired,
you were like, absolutely do not
I hate
ask
it when they
this
make you put in a number
question?
for. I
Obviously,
mean,
the
ours is
salary part,
optional in
but
our application.
are there others that you,
I mean, you
from
can go
your
with what you
many,
last
many
earned,
experiences of interviews that you were just
but
put
anywhere
an
you
X on
can
the paper
indicate
when you heard
negotiable,
someone
because you
ask a
really
question?
don't know, and you want to get your foot in the door. I never
Great.
have
No, it's
put X on the
great
paper,
advice.
but
And then going back to
I
the
think it's
gap
a
again,
little
there's a
too
lot of
soon to
interest
get
in that.
into minute
Um,
details like
what about, do
how
you
often are you
put anything
paid
in
and
the
what's
cover
the
letter
copay on the
that's
benefit
sort of
on the health
transparent
insurance.
related to your
Those
gap?
things you
And
can
do
get
you
from the
recommend
HR
that
people.
prior to the
Don't
interview,
waste your
obviously?
interview
So
time.
a
You
little
should be
pre
selling yourself a little
this
bit in those
session, but
questions. So
and
demonstrate
how do
your
you
knowledge
list
of the
the
company.
unemployment maybe on your
That's when I'm
resume
most
appropriately?
impressed. Well, so I think on your resume, so say you last worked in 2010. So, your resume should, and I'm a fan of a chronological resume, even in these situations. I think that the most recent employment should show, and sometimes people shift to functional resumes because they want to hide the gap. And the first thing a recruiter does, because remember, they look at your resume less than 20 seconds, the first thing they do is try to figure out what roles did you have and for how long. And so a functional resume where you kind of hide all the years that you worked where drives recruiters nuts because they have to spend time figuring that out and they often just abandon it. So on the resume, if your last job ended in 2010, say that, and you don't need to have anything after it. I mean, it says employment experience and it's the last job. On the cover letter, you can mention it, but I don't know that there's anything you can mention that's not already obvious on the resume. I mean, you could say that for the last, since 2010, you have been caring for family members. And you're, excited about reentering the workforce. You got to be a little careful. You don't want them discriminating against you in a way where they back in and think, oh, well, I bet this person has really young kids. That's going to be hard. I mean, you don't, so that's why I would be vague about what it is. I wouldn't say, that it's kids. I mean, it could be a parent,
So
right?
I'm
You
going
don't know who it
to
is.
before we ask the
But I
next
wouldn't be so
question, I'm just
afraid
going to
of
take
it.
this moment just to
Cover letters
quickly
are kind of a
open
funny
up
thing.
in everyone's browser
Some
a
companies require
survey.
them.
So just
In
before the
technology, we generally
next
hate
activity
them.
that you do, just take a
We
minute just
never
to
read
complete
them,
this. It will
and
help
it's just a reason to
me
like hit the down arrow.
assess the programs and just
Nonprofits, they're
identify
really
what needs
important.
are that
It
you
really
would like me
depends
to
on
explore
the
for next
organization.
presenters. And again, if you have an expertise similar to Raelene and you would like to share with fellow alumni, please reach out to me. I'd love to speak with you further about that opportunity. But going back to the questions, Raelene, related to the interviews in general, what differences may there be in, say, a C-level executive interview versus a sort of earlier career type interview? Are there
That's a good question. So much depends on the executive. I find that the earlier career ones tend to be can be more towards testing um, black and white things, where higher level executives tend to more want to have a conversation. So
great?
as an example, like in my
And
company,
going back to
I interview
some
most
LinkedIn things that you
leaders,
mentioned earlier about the
all senior
research, and then
leaders.
actually
But
looking
and
at your
I love
interview
interviews, so I offer my
interviewer
services to interview
profile
all
and so
levels.
forth, doing a little research on the
But
individual
the
as well as the
executive
company. One thing I
team
wanted to ask you,
relies
and
on me to do the behavioral, and they tend to have much more of a chat.
pretty sure I know the answer. I just wanted to
So
make
it
sure
tends to be
others hear it.
more
Is what is
informal. It's
appropriate
been my
as far
experience.
as reaching out and connecting with an HR representative from a company that you've applied, or some of the individuals that you have going to meet or have just met from an interview? Is it with a connection, sort of a thank you again? It was a pleasure meeting you. I
Yeah, it's very appropriate after you meet them. After you meet them, yeah, exactly. After you meet them, in fact, that's a good question. And in fact, I probably should have added to the slides. You really, it's a savvy candidate. There was a candidate I interviewed on campus recently, and by the time he left the interview room, and by the time I finished the next interview, I had the thank you note and I had the LinkedIn Connect. I mean, you want to be building your network. Your network is a very valuable thing, so you should always ask. Like every one of you should ask to link in with me after this call. I mean, networks are what's going to help everyone get jobs. And it depends on who you talk to, what the percentage is, but the way it works with hiring managers hate to look for people. As frustrated as you may be about trying to find a job, a hiring manager is equally frustrated that they're not finding candidates. So when there's someone within a
So
company that says, "Hey, I'm looking for this person,"
don't connect with
this
somebody
role for this
prior to an
person I
interview that
know,
you know
it
you're
just seems
interviewing
like a
with,
quick fix
or
to
someone that
fill
you
the. In
have
fact, there's
done research.
sometimes
Maybe you haven't even
I think
received
we
the interview
overly
offer. You're
rely
just starting
because
connecting with people that
we
you've
think
already
that the
applied
candidate
for the
has
job.
more of a blessing by that person
Wait.
than they really do. So networking is key, and LinkedIn is the best way to get connected. But wait until after the interview. Now, I'll have
So
one
looking at
other caveat on that. I mean,
alumni
like
that
what I
might be willing to have
if
a
the
conversation, a
recruiter
phone
said you're going to
conversation,
interview with Jane,
and
Sally,
it's
and
okay to
Sue.
do that
Don't
prior
see
to
that
if
email
you've
and
got an interview
get
lined up
connected
and
to
you
Jane,
know that
Sally,
this
and Sue on
person's not
LinkedIn.
interviewing you.
But what
You
a
just
lot of
like
people
to
do
have,
quite effectively is they really want to get into a
got it.
certain company and they network LinkedIn people in that company. And that's awesome. That's great.
So one final question here
Absolutely.
about timelines of hiring these days. If you know you aren't available, say, until the summer, when should you be starting to
Or
apply?
even
And
just
what
to
is
explore
the sort of
opportunities in the
turnaround
company.
time on your end? I
Yes,
think it
all
would
that's
vary
good,
in
but don't
industries.
just take
I
the
would
the interview list of people and try to link in with them before you meet them. That doesn't serve much good. It does. And even within any company, you never know. So I always assume that what I what I tell most people is, so standard time to fill on the company side is about 8 weeks from posting to fill, and that's average, right? So some are 12 and 14 weeks. Rarely is it quicker than 6 weeks. So that's a lot longer than you think. And so if you think about 8 weeks, you think about it's posted, they gather candidates, they have to coordinate schedules to interview. You're almost at 4 weeks now. Now you've figured out your final person.
Great.
You've done references. Now you're 5 weeks. You present the offer.
Well,
You negotiate the
now is the
offer. Now you're
time,
at
and
6
thank you
weeks.
so much, Raelene,
You've
for all the
accepted
time
offer,
you've
and you get
prepared for
2
this,
weeks
the
notice.
presentation, but
Remember, you
all
can
that you've
always
done for
negotiate
William
on
Mary
start date.
as
So
a
have them fall in
volunteer,
love
both for
with
the
you.
students
Get
and for
that
the
offer,
alumni,
and then say, I know
your
you wanted me to
committed
start May
families'
1. Is there any way
time
I
to
can
the
start June
institution.
1?
We really appreciate
So
it, and I
do it
hope
now.
all of you
If
enjoyed
you're talking
today's
summer, now
presentation.
is the
Just
time.
a few quick marketing coming up. 28th is our online networking hour next Wednesday. So if you haven't participated in one of those, it's a great way to network with alumni around the world. And the switchboard, which Raelene is a huge supporter of and one of our active users on the switchboard for alumni. It's a William Mary alumni only platform to ask, offer, and connect with one another. So I recommend going to wm.switchboardhq.com if you haven't already, and join and check it out, and post and comment and ask questions to one another. It's a great way to help each other if you know of positions that may not be in your area, but would love to see William Mary fill a spot. That's what this is intended for. So I know Raelene has used it and appreciated it for her needs at CVP and other in just volunteering and advice to candidates out there in the search. So again, Raelene, thank you so much, and thank you all for joining us, and we hope you have a wonderful weekend.